everyone. It's such a pleasure to be able to participate in the Toronto Global Forum. I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam and Tsawwassen First Nations. I apologize that I couldn't be there with you in person. It was an honor to be asked by the International Economic Forum of the Americas to introduce such an important session at this conference, how we can make our workforce more inclusive, more diverse, and therefore much stronger. Right now, we have an opportunity to really change how things have been done. The pandemic has given us the opportunity to build a stronger, more inclusive workforce and economy together. I don't need to remind anyone how incredibly challenging the last 2 years have been. As Canada's Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion, my main focus throughout the pandemic was to ensure workers were safe and supported. In Canada, we introduced many different temporary measures and benefits to do just that. Those income supports we put in place weren't just the right thing to do, they were the smart thing to do. Now, as we recover, our task is clear. We have to strategically and intentionally build the strong, skilled workforce that Canada needs so that our economy continues to grow and workers continue to thrive. Together, we need to maximize workforce participation so that everyone in this country who wants to work has the chance to. Maximizing workforce participation is about accessing pools of talent that have historically been overlooked. I'm talking about many traditionally marginalized people, women, Indigenous peoples, newcomers, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ2S+ people, and racialized Canadians. These groups of people have faced significant challenges and barriers to entering the workforce. These barriers range from discriminatory attitudes and practices to lack of accessibility to inadequate housing and transit options. Quite frankly, we're not going to succeed as a country if we continue to leave talented, capable, working-age people on the sidelines. Our people are our greatest resource. We need to ensure that they have the chance to get the skills and experience they need to join the workforce with confidence. This is exactly what we're doing. As Minister, I can say that all of our investments, policies, and actions designed to boost employment and strengthen our workforce are guided by the principle that an inclusive workforce is a strong one. This past May, we announced the first investment in our apprenticeship service program, $247 million to create over 25,000 new apprenticeships across Canada, and since then have announced thousands more through this incredible program. We invest in organizations like Canada's building trades unions, who then distribute $5,000 incentives for businesses to create apprenticeship opportunity in the red steel trades. And that incentive is doubled to $10,000 for employers who hire people from marginalized groups, like women and persons with disabilities. And that's just one example. Through our Women's Employment Apprenticeship Program, our Skilled Trades Awareness and Readiness Program, and so many others, we're focused on unlocking opportunities for these individuals who have so much to offer our workforce, but have traditionally been overlooked. I'm also excited that we recently released Canada's first ever Disability Inclusion Action Plan. The action plan has 4 pillars: financial security, employment, accessible and inclusive communities, and a modern approach to disability. A key component of the action plan's second pillar is our employment strategy for persons with disabilities. In Budget 2022, the Government of Canada committed $272.6 million over 5 years to support the implementation of this employment strategy. The strategy aims to help more persons with disabilities find and keep good jobs, advance in their careers, or become entrepreneurs. Inclusion is not just the right thing to do. It's a smart thing too. For example, 22% of the population identifies as having a disability. If our workplaces are fully inclusive of Canadians with disabilities who can work, we could see a bump in our GDP by nearly 2%. Right now, Canada doesn't know how much it's missing. The untapped pool of talent in this country is deep. We will be amazed at who and what we become as a country when every single person has a chance to participate. I hope you have a productive session. Thank you all for taking part in this incredibly important discussion. Let's continue working together to build a better, more inclusive workforce and country for all Canadians.
You know, I think that at this time of day, sometimes we're challenged with how we're feeling because we've heard a lot, we've experienced a lot, we've met some new people. So if you feel the need to stand up and walk around, I will take no offense to that. I want you to be comfortable because this is a very comfortable topic for us. And it's about the people. We heard the minister say that. This is very much about the fact that our people are our greatest resource. So how do we recognize the imperative of understanding what that truly means? And I'm very, very fortunate to have 3 people with me this afternoon that I respect dearly, but also whom have very specific perspectives on the conversation that we're about to have. With us in Europe, we have Andy Garrett from GSK. Andy is the Workplace Adjustments and Accessibility Director. And GSK is a global science-led healthcare company with a purpose to help people do more, feel better, and live longer. Welcome, Andy. Thanks for your patience. I know you were waiting with anticipation to start, so thank you for joining us. We also have to my left, Van Zorbas, who is the Chief Culture and People Officer for Deloitte Canada and Chile, I understand, right?
Yes.
So you are about the talent experience. And of course, Deloitte does audit, tax consulting, risk advisory, but their purpose is noted as powerful teams solving the toughest problems. I sense a pattern. I'm also thrilled to have with me Thais Pinto, who is the president of the IEFA, the International Economic Forum of the Americas. And the IEFA has a purpose to promote understanding of major economic challenges and convene discussion on current social and political issues. So when you have a challenge, when you have a problem, who do you invite to have the conversation? Problem solvers. And it sounds like we have 3 problem solvers with us today. In front of us, we have the changing landscape of employment that's been impacted by COVID, procurement difficulties, supply chain and demand, some even geopolitical issues, and all of these feel huge and way out here. However, what we're going to talk about today is talent, which is something that we have the ability to make decisions that improve our environments, the workforce, the people that we do business with every day. So Van, I'm going to start with you. How do you see, or what is your specific industry perspective on the economy of talent?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Well, in Deloitte, it's pretty easy that talent is our number 1 asset. We have about 97% of our firm's revenue is driven by people. So talent takes on a very high level of importance within a firm like ours. Over the last couple of years through COVID, it's been quite a taxing time, not only from the individual side. You heard the minister talk about some of the challenges we had, the same challenges with our workforce, ensuring they were feeling safe, going through the mental health issues that were there. But there was also something that popped up from an economy perspective, which was this notion of the Great Resignation. And in the Great Resignation, what has really happened is the older age workforce, 55 plus, shrank within Canada specifically. It started in the US, but it came to Canada as well. The younger generation, 25 to 54, increased, but it didn't increase at the same level as that age force. Now, there's lots of contributing factors to why that would happen. But the challenge that we have in Canada is that we rely 100% on net new growth for labor force through immigration. And the challenges we have to get at, I think personally, are around getting at some of those labor forces that we haven't been able to touch because of systematic barriers, which we're talking about today in diversity. So within our business, what we saw was a heightened importance on talent to a level that we'd never seen before, which was very positive, which allowed us, me and my department, to kind of push the envelope on some of the things we needed to do to sort of improve our talent, improve the ability to give talent ideas to increase productivity. But we also had a challenge around the supply side and how are we going to get supply? And it was really an issue around having more business in our firm than the supply people to kind of get through that. So every industry was affected differently. Within the business that Deloitte runs, we have about 70% of our business is what we would say advisory as opposed to audit and tax, which is kind of consulting parlance for people that are in the room that would understand that. The technology boom that came out of COVID put a lot of pressure on those skill sets. And we're seeing a shortage of skills and mismatch of skills that we're trying to get on top of in terms of the reskilling and retraining to get people up to speed as quickly as we can. So in our industry specific, technology is a huge gap for us in terms of trying to get as many people as we can, certainly cloud technology that goes forward, and then industries like cybersecurity, things of that nature that actually put a pressure on us. So a broad base, but really in the consulting piece from an economic perspective, put a lot of pressure on a firm like Deloitte.
Wow, thank you for that. I think you introduced about 4 topics that would make this about a week-long seminar instead of a 45-minute seminar, but I'm going to ask the same question to you. I think that there's a dynamic to your organization that could be really helpful to other companies better understand the imperative of having a diverse and inclusive culture.
Yeah, so unlike Deloitte, we are a very small team in the IEFA, but we are a very diverse one. And that's very important to us because, as you may know, we have conferences in 4 different countries. And having that diverse talent within the small group, which is mainly Montreal, but also in each and every location where we have conferences, helps us make that connection with the local community and make us better partners for the business community as well to have these kinds of platforms. And I can also relate to what you were saying about the, reskilling and the talent that has to change with the pandemic, because we had also to completely change our business model in the IEFA. So we started many years ago in 1994 in Montreal with conferences that were all in person all the time. And then the pandemic hit. At that point, we had to change completely to a virtual platform during 2020, which required us to have new technology, and today with the hybrid format, we're still having that in-person feeling, but at the same time, we have the chance to be speaking to great speakers everywhere in the world and having participants also listen to us from everywhere, but that requires a different kind of talent. So we do need to have people with experience in social media, digital marketing, things that were not in the front for us.
Excellent, thank you very much. So we've heard about technology and the need for the diversity of perspective and how to engage, the different formats of engagement. So Andy, I'm going to pass it to you. In that context of perspective on the economy of talent, I know that it means very different things to you at GSK and some of the work that you've been doing. But one of the things that I'd like to ask you about is when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we often emit this sense that everybody understands exactly what that means. From my perspective, though, diversity often leaves out disability. Can you tell us a little bit about your context and speak to that specifically?
Yes, well, firstly, thank you for having the opportunity to join your discussion today. Talent, as I've just heard the previous speakers, is a key value driver for organizations, and particularly diversity of talent, diversity of thinking to support your research and development, your productivity. We're a science-led organization operating in 92 countries with a myriad of specialist different roles. And of course, we want diverse talent into all of our teams to help us think about innovative solutions. And to enable that, my particular passion, of course, is around disability inclusion, but the same applies to all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you really need to create the working environments and the opportunities that make it easy for people of difference to be able to access the workplace, to be able to access opportunities, and to have the confidence to ask for what they need for them to be able to thrive in the workplace, to ask for what they need to be able to apply for opportunities. The trouble with legislation usually runs a bit behind culture, and it's really important that you have protective legislation in all economies to guard against unlawful and unfair discriminatory practice in that first phase of change. But for disability, quite a number of people, for lots of reasons, might not attribute their circumstances to a label of disability. Many do, but some are fearful of negative consequence assumption about their capabilities. And for us at GSK, if we think specifically about removing barriers, making it easier for people to put their hand up to ask for that adjustment, that accommodation that will enable them to be successful and to thrive or to apply for opportunities. So actually our model at GSK focuses less on someone qualifying under protective legislation as having a disability, and really tries to focus on what do you need to thrive and to be successful, and less about why you need it, so that we can give people the confidence to say, that is what I need to thrive as a person of difference, and less about asking them to attribute their circumstances to a label of one or other protected characteristic. And of course, there are self-identification tools within employment on HR systems, but naturally, employees, new talent, new hires may be reluctant to share some of that information with their employer or their prospective employer. So for us at GSK, it's been very much around trying to remove some of those traditional barriers to give people really a bit more confidence to say, actually, this is what I need to be successful in the workplace. And then we help them to get that thing, to give them that accommodation, that adjustment, whether it's specialist assistive technology or some other tool that they need to be successful in their roles working for us. We want them to thrive in all of their diversity, rather than the sometimes limited perceptions of what qualifies and constitutes a disability.
Jamie, can I build on that as
Yeah,
well?
please.
Too? And on my previous speaker as well. I mean, COVID has changed the way that we look at work as well. And in a firm like Deloitte, we had a traditional way of working where people were in or at client sites constantly. And the notion that you wouldn't have to go to a client site 24/7 to do a project was, of course, something we could not get through unless COVID hit, and then proved that we could actually do it. But I think what we're talking about here today is also this notion of, when I talked about the systematic barriers in our workforce, it is people with disability. It is the indigenous population. And even from our perspective, gender, because we would have a blockage in gender where women that wanted to go off and have children would be stuck not being able to participate fully in the workforce at a firm like Deloitte. So there's a great opportunity now coming out of COVID, I believe, that we tap into those untapped labor markets, really, to the point that was just made, making sure that people are thriving of all levels, because diversity around all levels obviously rises profitability within organizations. And I think that's the point that Canada has right now, those untapped labor markets that we haven't really tacked at.
And I agree. I think that that's where you're at. And you both have mentioned that. And when you put it into the context, Andy, you've kind of had us thinking about, how do you maximize someone's potential? And you've addressed sort of that need to remove barriers. And you've mentioned that there's specific considerations when we look at identity and what are the barriers that we create because we put roadblocks in people's way, or we don't think about how to do things differently. So I will challenge you in this moment to think about, some of the things that have changed, and you have mentioned a few of them. But when you look at skill mobility and skill identification, where you have to do upskilling or you have to utilize the skills that you have because you can't replace the skills, and whether we want to call it quiet quitting or the great resignation, in front of us right now is a genuine need to connect to the sense of employee engagement. So maybe we'll start with you then. Is there an element here of how you've recognized some of the processes or some of the methodologies that you are now incorporated into the workplace, where you really have this idea that you are leading with employee engagement and recognizing the person?
Yeah, so I think that that's something that we touch upon a little bit, but the flexibility that we had during the pandemic, because we didn't have any choice, right? We also used to work 5 days a week at the office, and suddenly we were all at home for more than a year and a half. And that showed us that people could do the work from almost everywhere. and be engaged and deliver a great work. We delivered great events during that time. And so the question became to us when we decided to open up the office again in June of this year, how are we going to do this? We even had employees that were hired during the pandemic who had never seen our offices before. And then it became, what is the right solution? Taking into account that sometimes people have moved away from the office, so the commuting is longer. People have also parenting obligations, caregiving obligations, or even sometimes disability, not even permanent, but temporary disability that requires us to have that flexibility, right? So at the IEFA, we decided to give people that flexibility. We have 2 days a week where people work from the office, where you get that human connection that we so much longed for during the pandemic, where we couldn't meet. But at the same time, it gives them that flexibility to take care of elderly parents, children, take a day, or that the commuting is easier in Montreal because honestly, sometimes on Fridays, it's easy to go downtown Montreal instead of a Thursday. I don't know why, but I don't know if here in Toronto is the same thing, but in Montreal, certainly, there's different days, different traffic jams.
I'm laughing because I've been there. I think we all have. And I think you're right. So you're talking about some of the things that we saw because the world experienced COVID and businesses had to make decisions. And because of the necessity of the moment, we made changes and we were flexible. This morning, there was conversation, about having some of that stabilization, but knowing that there's variables. I'd like to think of this in the context of having consistency with flexibility. Andy, what are some of the things that you have incorporated at GSK that recognize the imperative of being flexible in order to continue and really develop that employee engagement and participation?
Indeed. If the pandemic has given any benefits at all, it's in proving the value in hybrid, flexible working environments. We've moved away from through that learning. We've moved away from a one-size-fits-all model, and I think businesses are learning that you need to provide a variety of different working environments. The collaboration spaces where people can get together and work in groups, but also giving people the right equipment and technology to do focused work. Where they are and in ways that work for them. Yes, most companies have a catalog of software or furniture or things that you might need to do your role. And again, moving on from the one-size-fits-all model, if you're talking about particularly in disability and health conditions, quite often it's that individual that needs something else, something different that's not available in standard catalogs. And what we've done is we've really worked hard to remove the barriers to make it easier. If you need something different for you to thrive and be successful, that's fine. We don't need to sit you in front of a doctor to agree that you need it. Let's find out what that thing is, what that working environment is, and let's do that for you. Certainly if people are working in remote and home settings, we've got to provide people with the right equipment. You can't expect people to balance a laptop off a dining table for months on end. It's just not ergonomically and healthy, sound to do so. You need to equip people to work effectively where they are working, but also guarding against the risk of living in the office. You're working from home or in your remote working setting. So we've been really careful to create dynamic and a variety of modern work environments that enable people to work in ways that work for them. So there's an element of personalization, like I say, moving away from the catalog model.
So if I've heard you correctly, then Andy, how GSK has identified to help people do more, feel better, and live longer is actually what they're practicing internally. It's not just about serving their clients, it's actually promoting a value where the imperative is on understanding that you are helping people thrive, succeed. And there's this notion of bring your whole self to work. And we have a better understanding today, I feel, than ever before.
And being your authentic self at work.
Authentic self. I like that. Thank you, Andy. So maybe, Van, you can share with us a little bit, how has the culture at Deloitte changed? And when we're talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I'm going to add accessibility because it's not often added, how have you seen the changes, and what are some of the things that have been working well, and what are some of the things that you're still working on?
Yeah, we were embarking on a cultural change before COVID around our people and our clients being at an equal level, which might sound a little odd to those who are not in a professional services firm, but we had a mindset where our people came in on a constant flow because they were coming to get accredited, and then they'd spend some time with us and move off into industry. So we were working on that, but it's been accelerated through COVID. A couple of things that we were able to do is we were able to measure productivity through COVID and notice that as we were giving people time off, and we called these things Deloitte days where everybody went off at the same time, we didn't lose an ounce of productivity. And we give about 12 of these days per year, over and above the vacation pieces. That allowed us to sort of prove this notion around working differently and allowing people to work the way that they work best to maximize productivity. And so the cultural shift we're trying to drive is around how people like to work, where they want to work, and what drives that productivity for them as at an individual level up to the highest peak. And that's where we're sort of rooted in from a cultural perspective. Our diversity, inclusion, and equity, including accessibility, has always been a pillar at Deloitte. We've been on the journey for a while, but again, the narrative around how we work in the new future, I think, has accelerated it for us, where we're going at targeted population basis. If you think about, certainly in the city of Toronto, the education system, we've got some challenges as we can continue to go through that. I mentioned technology. Well, Black individuals are pushed out of STEM at an early age within this city. And so how do you go at that population base, and how do you sort of ensure that you're infusing and getting different populations not in the same way you're doing it? If you go in the same systematic way of recruiting, we're going to go to the same university schools, expect certain dots on resumes, and they're not going to come through. So how do we actually accelerate that? Those are the kind of notions we start to go, because we truly believe that having a diverse culture right across the board, from a leadership all the way down, is something that changes the mindset and actually improves productivity and profitability. And so we're trying to make these cultural changes at the systematic level, which is things like reskilling, as we talked about. I was at a conference earlier where a gentleman stood up and said that the resume was created by Leonardo da Vinci. That's how old the resume is. And if we actually just started to test for competency-based, we'd be able to get into individuals that we can reskill real quick, as opposed to an age-old method that he was using way back in the old days. So we're trying to make this shift. We're not there completely, but we're trying to make this shift so that we can bring all these different diverse pockets into the firm, and I believe will increase productivity.
Okay, so now I'm going to put your colleagues who are on the panel on the spot for a moment, because I really like that subject. It's something that resonates with me personally. I think that resumes are archaic. I think that they do not do anything to predict the future of one's ability, but I do think it's not just the resume, it's the process. It's that formalization of it has to be that you apply via an online link, which does not serve all, and then you have to do a formalized conversation face-to-face, typically, and then you have to know the context that you're speaking. So maybe I'll start with Andy and I'll come to you. Andy, is there anything that you can see in some of the practices that you've incorporated to remove barriers to your employees that you've also incorporated into the processes for hiring?
Well, similarly with hiring, you need, whenever you're designing a process or even a technology tool, a business tool, you've got to start building accessibility in from the ground up. We've moved on from trying to rectify accessibility barriers at the back end. We shouldn't be there now. So even with recruitment processes, I'm conscious that companies are using more AI-based tools to screen resumes. Who's designing those algorithms? Are they thinking about people of difference? Within the recruitment selection process, is there the ability to offer an alternative to support accessibility and inclusion, because just as I was saying earlier, one size doesn't fit all. You have to be able to offer people alternative routes to be able to achieve the same if you're going to reach diverse talent.
Okay, so Thais, I know that you've mentioned earlier you have international events that you're responsible for. It's important to you that your team is diverse. Can you tell me, have you incorporated some different ways of hiring in order to be able to reach those individuals that you're looking to hire for the IEFA?
Yes, well, fortunate enough, when you have international in your name, you usually get a quite diverse set of people. We were actually doing some interviews back in Montreal a few weeks ago, and we get a variety of resumes from everywhere in the world. And I think it's because of the name and because of the fact that we have conferences everywhere. But we do, it's very important to us to make sure that we have that right balance of diversity. It's not, we don't have a very traditional set of work skills in the kind of work that we do. So we have to be very open-minded when we're looking for new team members to join the team.
So that theme of flexibility has come back again. And I just want to mention, you make a very valid point about international. So we often advise businesses when they're posting jobs to ensure that they do attract diverse talent. It's as simple as making a statement about that. Ensuring that you're offering accommodations or adjustments from the start for even the interviewing or the application process. It's saying, we welcome international experience. That is the demonstration of the intention to be inclusive in how you cultivate people. I'm wondering then, Van, if you can just share with me some of your perspective on how you position an approach to equity, diversity, and inclusion, and yes, accessibility. Not because I think we can all agree, and we've actually heard the minister say it earlier, and we heard it mentioned in one of the sessions this morning, that it's the right thing to do. So we understand that everyone in this room knows that. But how do you know it's the smart thing for business?
It's pretty easy, I would say. We have examples where we have put diverse leaders in charge of organizational divisions, products, different pieces where the growth rate far exceeds, after that diverse leader goes into place, the traditional leader, let's just call it that, as we've gone through it. And once you start to see that diversity of thought really increases growth within an organization, you're able to kind of prove it and move forward on it. We don't believe it's the nice thing to do. We believe it's for profit from our perspective. And we believe that at Deloitte, we're a firm that's for all, and that we should represent contemporary Canada. And that means that when people look up at our executive table or at our board, that they see themselves within leadership at the board. It also is imperative that we build trust. And I think this is one of the things where with some communities like the Indigenous community, how are we building trust with the corporate world, and how are we ensuring that that trust is built so that we can actually reciprocate back as we start to continue to help build the country and make sure that we're getting that labor force embedded in corporate Canada. And building trust within the firm is also talking about why we're doing these things. So we have lots of conversations and communication around why DE&I and accessibility is such a critical piece to us, and why that relates back. And for a firm that has been an audit and tax firm for 151 years, if you have data that leads to profit, it's very helpful. But having that communication, I would say, is a critical piece. We talked about simple things like systematic barriers within recruiting. I can give you a story around just on gender. And I think Andy talked about who writes the algorithms for the AI. That becomes part of the challenge when you start to get to these next levels. But we did a full resume cleansing of about 150 resumes, male and female, coming into the firm from a campus hire. And we had people that had taken unbiased training to go and do the resume screening. And we left the names on the resumes, and the split was about 60-40. I'm making the numbers up just for direction, but 60-40, 60% male, 40% females. We took the same resumes, cleansed the names, so you would not be able to tell what gender they were. It was absolutely inverse. 60-40 females to males. So it shows you the unconscious bias that you got to continuously work on, and you got to work through the processes that exist within your organization to ensure that they don't get. So there's a lot of work to be done within this notion, but I truly believe it becomes at the top: communication, effectiveness, talking about trust, talking about why it's important within the organization. And it's pretty evident when you actually see it in action, when you start to move diverse talent, diverse teams collectively together, how much more output, diversity of thought comes into it, and that directs right down to profit.
So the theme of trust and then the diversity of thought. So Angie, I'm coming back to you to challenge you again for this one. So I think that there's this understanding of how we engage with each other as well at work. And so if we look to build trust, and sometimes we hear how organizations are positioning their employee engagement groups or the resource groups to action, events or conversations and that sort of thing. I think that there is this understanding that it can't just be an activity. It has to be that we normalize it and that we begin to incorporate it into all lines of business. How do we engage with them to be part of the decision-making process? How do we invite the diversity of thought in all elements of decision and provide the opportunity to have autonomy, to empower our employees to add their perspective? How often do we invite their perspective? Perhaps, Andy, you can share with us some examples that you've experienced there in developing your brand new line that was not previously at JSK before you developed, the workplace adjustments, and how well it has not only been implemented and rolled out, but also the changes that have come from that engagement.
Indeed. One of the things I think we're really proud of and that we've been successful in at GSK is one of the other hats I wear is I'm also co-chair of our global employee resource group for disability, and myself and my co-lead colleagues sit on our global disability council. We help to set the strategy for our disability confidence 3-year plan. We meet with the senior executives each quarter. We've got a voice at the table. And it's part of what we call that third phase of change, where in the first phase of change, you might bring in protective legislation. And the second phase of change, you would expect organizations to build diversity and equity inclusion into their policies and practices. But fundamentally, that third phase is listening directly to your diverse talent, to your people, getting them involved in testing your processes for equity and inclusion. How does it feel on the receiving end? Getting them involved in measuring progress, giving that voice of customer, and having them at the seat in setting and designing the strategy for your inclusion programs, your disability confidence programs, or other aspects of inclusion. Working with your employee resource groups and investing in them is such a valuable investment to get your people helping to set the tone for change.
Set the tone for change. I'm going to use that to ask the three of you for a very personal perspective. So as you look at this tone and the change and transition that we're talking about, the imperative of establishing protocols, methodologies, the means by which we demonstrate intention to ensure that we have inclusive workplace, where we talk about the intersectionality of identities and recognize that we are all unique. We have unique attributes and we have unique things that we would be able to bring to the job that would make us distinctly different than someone else. What is your personal connection to what you've accomplished at the IEFA, and how do you see that it's affected yourself and the job that you have?
Well, so I'm a mom with 3 kids, right? So knowing the importance of flexibility, of flexible hours, of the trust that your employer puts on you, and making sure that even though he knows you're not in the office in the usual business hours, 5 days a week, but at the end of the day, you're able to deliver the great work that you can, that's struck a chord with me. Because, and that's what I try to convey to the team, to make sure that they have that trust, that they know that the company trusts them, that they are going to do with the flexibility, with the acceptance of the differences that they have, they will be able to do the best job that they can. And at the same time, when the employees feel they are trusted, they feel more engaged. And that's exactly what we want. We want to keep them engaged because we want to keep them around for a long, long time, especially now that we're all in a talent war. We don't want to lose them, but also because engaged employees stay longer, they're happier, they do the best work. It's good for the bottom line at the end of the day, right?
It's good for the bottom line. Thanks, Thais. I appreciate that. Vin?
Yeah, I mean, there's many stories. We celebrate as many religious holidays as we can at the firm level and at the executive level, either through notes through our CEO, which we encourage AV to send out, something that I had started back when I was leading one of the business divisions. Things like celebrating Diwali with a group of colleagues on a conference night and recognizing and then seeing how important it is to our Indian colleagues that we actually celebrated and recognized it. And we put on a celebration with dancers and things of that nature because it was we were asking them to come on their holiday. And a small gesture of thinking through that ahead of time, ahead of planning a conference, but seeing the profound impact really resonates with you as a leader to say, we have to look at things through each other's eyes. This year, a bunch of executives went on Ramadan and actually went and did the fast that they had not done before, celebrate it, talk about it. We have a Yammer post that is quite active. And so we talked about that. We talked about what it was like to go through, to celebrate with our colleagues that were going through that piece. And I think for me, it makes me a better leader to understand what people go through on a regular basis in terms of the different cultural norms, the different pieces that they have, and also to recognize and meet people where they need to be met during these times, but also just recognizing that we are a sum of so many different parts, and all of those parts are such a critical piece of what makes the fabric of Deloitte up. So I think that resonates with me in some of those moments.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Andy, what about you? What is your personal connection to this, and how has it affected you and your job?
Well, I suppose fundamentally it's about sharing. So in my case, I have that lived experience of disability. I have a central field vision condition that's not always evident, showing that, many health conditions and disabilities are not visible, but they impact people in their daily lives. And what we try to do is to get more people to have the confidence to share their experience, their lived experience of how a diversity or a number of diversity characteristics affects their daily lives, either for them as an individual or someone in their close personal connections with people, loved ones. The more we engage and share of ourselves, our diversity, and our value as different individuals, I think it shows other people with diverse and protected characteristics that's okay, that's what the company wants. That's what will drive talent and productivity, and it will help your organization to meet diverse customers. Customers with health conditions, disabilities, of different faiths, of different, sexual orientations, and so on. It's not just about the employee life cycle, and it's making you a better organization to reach your goals as a company, to reach more diverse communities and customers.
So in that knowing, and I want to go back to something that Minister Qualtrough said, in that she announced that there has just been launched a Disability Inclusion Action Plan. And the Minister of Employment is also the same minister who's responsible for disability inclusion, as well as economic development, business development. So let's look at that for a moment and recognize in this moment how powerful what you've been sharing with us is on business. The value of understanding the worth of not only having knowledge about equity, diversity, and inclusion, but knowing what it means to have it innately part of the decisions that you make. So just to wrap up this session, I'm going to challenge the three of you to share with us a reason or an action that you can challenge this room on to say, how can we recognize and share with each other in the context of a business-to-business practice that helps the government move this forward, that recognize that, sure, disability is one identity, but we've been talking about a diversity of not just thought, not just people, but also solutions, and recognizing the importance of that human element. It's been a human connection that the three of you have just shared with us. How do you put that into the context of economy? I'm going to challenge you to go first, Tees.
That's a tough one. Well, I think that we are currently in a period where the world is changing at a very, very fast pace. And we have to be able to adjust to not only survive, but to thrive as businesses. And having a diverse and inclusive, not only policies in your workplace, but also living the culture, making sure that people, like we mentioned before, bring their authentic selves to work, feel safe to share their opinions, will make us increase creativity, innovation, and that's what business need right now to make sure that they are going to thrive in this ever-changing world.
That's great, thank you. Ben.
Yeah, I think if I was speaking directly to the government, I would be talking about, as opposed to immigration is a critical piece for our labor force going forward, but so is the segments that we've talked about today. And how do we really enhance the segments we have today? Whether it's the Indigenous population and how do we reskill the Indigenous population, whether it's some of the things Andy talked about in terms of the systematic barriers with people with disability. There are population bases that are out there that we can infuse into the labor force with a little bit of help to get that reskilling done. It's hard for corporations to do it all on its own. We're going to take front steps on it. But I think with government help, we can actually get that up to a higher level. And that will help all of us, certainly in tough sectors that like the technology sector that is booming within this country right now.
Thank you, and you're right to say it can be difficult, and that's why pairing with an organization like CCRW is really valuable for organizations trying to make change. Andy, I'm going to leave you with our last thoughts. Go ahead. How do you see this as an economic impetus?
I think you need to set the ambition above a compliance model and finally put to bed the medical model of disability, for example. Focus on what people need to thrive and succeed and not asking them to, clarify and check boxes. You can set your ambition, your process, your approach that delivers inclusion, trust, and productivity far more, and it will deliver compliance as a healthy byproduct. The aim here in government and in business here is to do the right thing by people, to enable them to access the opportunities and to contribute in ways that work for them, because that will make your organization successful, and of course your country goals successful. The more you can include people and the wider talent pool and giving them access, trusting them, and giving them the environment that enables them to participate.
I think that's a perfect ending. Thank you so much, Andy, Van, and Thais for sharing with us today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.